Buchanan. We are keeping our first speaker here comes to us by way of Oklahoma State University, now with Simplot. And I was just telling him I was on the phone with Dr. Kyle Lawrence about 20 minutes ago, and he's actually collecting data just as he's going to be talking about here. So they keep West Texas pretty busy. But we're going to listen to some bovine congestive heart failure phenotypes and how they relate to your world. Yes, you can.
I'm going to say thank you to Tommy for getting us in last minute. We were a little bit late on our presentation, but I think we got it in there. So appreciate the opportunity. We presented some of this work last year looking at congestive heart failure in the project that Simplot's been working on, collecting that phenotype and actually developing an EPD that predicts congestive heart failure as a breeding trait. We're going to add to that today. We're going to talk about some organ phenotypes we've been collecting and then tying that all together with some treatment records for bovine respiratory disease that we've also collected on these animals. So this is really the reason why we're so interested in this trait. These are two hearts pulled out of the dead pile in August of 2021 in our Grandview feedlot. These are pretty classic congestive heart failure cases. We might score these about a 4. Classic cases, you see the right ventricle of the heart's collapsed. They're nice and round. These animals clearly died of congestive heart failure. This is a real problem in the industry. It's why we're putting so much investment into looking at this trait as kind of a new phenotype and developing selection tools that we can both use to address the problem in our own operations, and we're also wanting to address this in the industry. This is a real problem. We published the first part of this research a couple of years ago. If you want to dig into those details or would like a copy, this is an open access article, so we can get you a copy if you need one. But that's going to be the first part. I'm going to kind of summarize what we found in that research. So the trait itself, congestive heart failure, Dr. Tim Holt and the Colorado State guys have done a great job characterizing where this starts and how it develops in the animal. The trait seems to begin with hypoxia, some state driving decreased oxygen in the animal. So whether that be elevation, whether that be some stressor or something going on in the feedlot, it seems to develop with hypoxia. The response to hypoxia seems to be constriction of the cardiopulmonary system as a whole. The veins and arteries in that animal, they clamp down. They're trying to force blood back to the lungs through the heart to get more oxygen to the animal. That constriction leads to an increased load on the heart. The heart's working harder to push against that constriction. Ultimately, we get edema in the animal. You start to get a fluid buildup in the thoracic cavity. That's one of the classic outward signs of animals suffering in the feedlot. Eventually, the heart fails, and they end up in the dead pile. So I think we're pretty sure on this one, being this is how the trait progresses, and it's been pretty well characterized. So for our research project that we looked at for scoring hearts, we went into our packing plant, CS Beef Packers. This is the gut table in that plant. Right there where the gold arrow is, we place a person right as the heart and the lungs are pulled out of that animal. And that person is staying there with a barcode scanner, and they scan carcass tags and they score the heart, the lungs, and then some of the other organs as well. It's been since about 2020 we've been doing that, and we collect several thousand scores per year. It's been a pretty efficient process. On the bottom here, this is the heart scoring classification developed by the Colorado State crew, Dr. Tim Holt and that group. It works pretty well. On the left, normal heart, all the way progressing through heart failure to a classic congestive heart failure case. That heart on the right has completely failed. That animal would be lucky to walk into the packing plant, but we do see them. The top pictures are pictures we've taken on the gut table right there at CS Beef Packers. Pretty good incidence of that trait showing up in our packing plant. And we think we've got a good hold on characterizing that heart score. So since 2020, here's where we're at. Heart scores 1 to 5 across. Since 2020, we're at about 92,000 total hearts scored through our packing plant. Somewhere around 50% of the hearts that we see on the table come out as normal. There's nothing wrong with them. They're completely healthy. The rest are 2s and above, some progression of congestive heart failure signs. Our current rate of 4s and 5s at harvest, 4 and 5 is what we would say is a congestive heart failure case. Those animals are in stage heart failure, sitting right at 4%. So these are animals that came through our packing plant under their own power. They walked in the door and came across the table and their heart was a score 4 or a 5. So that shows kind of the extent of the problem that exists in the feed yard. Those animals are alive in the feed yard, and we've got to do a good job at figuring out how to fix this from a genetic standpoint. We've taken a multi-breed approach in our phenotyping strategy. So we've collected some genotypes on these animals, and this is just a PCA plot showing the variety of breeds that we've characterized in our reference population. So all the way to the left, these are beef on dairy cross animals. All the way to the right, headed towards a more beef type animal with the gray box, or the gray circle there being Angus type beef animals. If we look at where the congestive heart failure cases occurred in that population, the first thing that jumps out to us is it happens in every breed. Every breed shows cases of 4s and 5s. Nobody seems to be immune from this, but there is some concentration over towards the beef side, towards the Angus, large Angus percent type animals. We did some work with a company called GenCove. We did some low pass genotyping. They put together a GWAS for us using about 1 million markers. A couple of different ways they took a stab at this analysis. Big takeaway is we don't really see any large QTLs for heart score. There's nothing really on that GWAS that jumps out at us. We have the 2 US markers highlighted there. Small peak on the second one, but nothing really coming back significant. The good takeaway, though, that we found is heritability does seem to be somewhere between 0.3 and 0.4. So we're pretty certain this is a polygenic trait. There's not a couple of markers we could use to predict risk. It's really a polygenic trait, no different from carcass weight or average daily gain, with a good heritability, so we can make selection progress. Keep going.
Manage technology for you for a sec. Get this out of the way.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
There you go.
So we took a look at the other traits that are associated. So all these animals that we heart score have all their carcass data, all their feedlot data associated with them. The right is really the big picture here. Genetic correlations to traits in our selection indexes seem significant. The biggest one that sticks out there on the right is hot carcass weight has a genetic correlation to congestive heart failure or heart score of 0.4. So really what we're doing with this trait, as we use our selection indexes to drive carcass weight and growth, we're pulling congestive heart failure cases right along with that selection. So if we don't create a tool to select against this, it's just going to get worse over time is what we're finding. Oh. Go right there.
It's your mic. Sorry.
Is it on?
Is it on?
Oh, I was speaking into it, didn't I?
Well, maybe it's battery still. Sometimes it just turns off by itself. Try that.
Is that any better? Oh, perfect.
Last time I'm coming up. I
Didn't
promise.
realize. You're good. Come back up. So just to get another look at kind of breed distribution and how this EPD kind of plays out in the populations we look at. This is a look at our purebred database at Simplot. These are Angus animals across the top, Charolais in the middle, Hereford along the bottom. There's where the average EPD for the congestive heart failure EPD lands. Charolais seems to be a little bit lower risk on the scale. Angus animals shift a little bit towards the right. Hereford somewhere in the middle. So when we're thinking about using this tool, this EPD as a selection tool, we kind of think about it within a breed. So if we're looking at Hereford, we kind of get calibrated on what's the scale for Hereford, what constitutes a high risk EPD for Hereford, high risk for Charolais, so on and so forth. There is a little bit of a breed bias in this. So mentioning that EPD, this is what our current EPD looks like. We're sitting pretty close to 20,000 genotyped and phenotyped individuals driving our EPD right now. We've done some validation, a 5-fold cross validation. We end up somewhere around a correlation of 0.87. We're pretty happy with that validation. One more look at that, maybe more of a practical type validation for the audience. On the bottom, this graph is showing there's the EPD. Each dot is an individual bull with greater than, I think, 50 calves in this data set. The y-axis is their congestive heart failure EPD. No, sorry. Y-axis is percent congestive heart failure cases in their calves. So the actual outcome of their calves versus the EPD. If we look all the way to the right, that bull has an EPD somewhere around 0.05. He's the highest in this graph, and it looks like he had somewhere around 13 or 14% congestive heart failure cases in his calves. So we're pretty happy with that validation. Seems like the EPD is doing what we think it does. Makes an accurate representation of where the bulls kind of lay out in the system. So going to move on to the additional traits we've added to the model. We've done some lung scoring and also tied that back to BRD treatment records in the feedlot. So the first trait that was developed, Randall's here. Randall had a big lead, taking the lead on developing these kind of veterinary diagnosis scores of these organs. So the first one that we score is called lung deflation score. This is an image of a healthy, normal set of lungs. So if you look at the tissue, it's nice and pink. These lungs are nice and elastic. They have deflated completely on the table. And a big thing to keep an eye on here is kind of the relationship between the size of the heart and the size of the lungs in this normal example. They're not that different in size. So keep that kind of picture in your head. Here's some more normals. So again, tissue is nice and pink. They've deflated. They look nice and elastic. If you touch these on the table, they're nice and soft. And those are healthy sets of lungs. So the first progression of lung deflation, these is what we would call a moderate failure to deflate. So if you look at these from a side angle, the lungs sit a little bit higher up on the table. They have not shrunk down to that nice small size. These lungs are undergoing some type of fibrosis in the lung tissue. That fibrosis probably due to some type of inflammation or some cardiopulmonary response to what this animal is undergoing. So when they start that hypoxia and they start to respond to that, this is one of the symptoms that shows up is this failure to deflate trait. So again, keep an eye on the size of the heart in relation to the lungs in this case.
Just mic's a little bit closer.
A little bit closer.
Can you hear?
Is it back off?
Back there? No.
It says on.
It didn't work from it. Okay. I'll grab it, see if I can fix it. Thanks.
I'll just talk real loud.
Should be good.
Oh, good now? Thanks, Troy. Maybe I'm turning it off with my hand. Hold it down here. It's off. I can just talk real loud.
Oh, yeah, it's off. No? I don't know.
Can you just hold it for him?
Can I stand here?
Oh, yeah, it's shutting off. Yeah, that was, let me see if I can do something about it.
I'll just talk louder. So this is what we would classify as a severe failure to deflate. These lungs sit on the table very large. You notice that pink color's gone away. These lungs are also showing a little bit of signs of beginning bronchopneumonia. So there's a little bit of pathology added to this failure to deflate. But if you look at the size of that heart now, it is much smaller than the size of these lungs. Sitting on the table, these lungs they're about that big. They're quite large in relation to the size of the heart. And we would classify this as severe failure to deflate. Fibrosis, extensive fibrosis, something clearly going on that set of lungs. This is the count of the lung deflation scores that we've collected to date. So we're almost up to where we were with the heart scores. We're right at 89,000 lung scores. Somewhere right at about 7% are a moderate or a severe failure to deflate in our data. So what happens if we tie this together with the heart score? So now we've got along the x-axis here, we have the heart score buckets 1 to 5, and then there's the categories of deflation. So if we look at heart score 1, normal deflated, about 77% of heart score 1s have normal lungs. If we go down all the way to heart score 5, that drops to 54%. So this kind of shows the picture. It's pretty clear there's something going on between these two traits. The more likely you are to have heart remodeling or progress along the heart score categories, you're going to have a failure to deflate in the lungs. The next trait that was added was lung pathology. So these are some examples of what we're talking about. We classified pathology in terms of what's the actual veterinary diagnosis, and then what's the extent of the pathology. Is it only a portion of the lungs, or is it covering the entire surface? So here's a few examples. Bronchointerstitial, in the center there is bronchopneumonia. This one, Randall and I were discussing this morning, is actually probably is embolic pneumonia. He said this case actually had abscesses in the liver. Those abscesses ruptured, went through the portal vein, and came up and infected the lungs. So something clearly going on with those as well. We again put that pathology classification. So when pathology was present, we put that into 4 buckets scored by the technician scoring hearts. We've got normal or 0% no pathology, so healthy lungs. Mild, we classified as 0 to 5. Moderate was 5 to 50, and then severe, greater than 50% pathology of the lungs. So just over 3%, kind of in that severe to moderate classification. Again, if we break that out by the heart score categories, it seems like there's also an association in this data, just looking at the raw phenotypes. As you move across heart score, pathology seems to be more likely. So this is probably, there's some interactions going on that can't fully be explained here. So if an animal develops pathology in the lung tissue, that's probably a certain trigger for the animal to start that hypoxia cascade, where if they develop that hypoxia, something's going on, the animal's trying to recover. Heart score may be one of the indicators that pops up. Now we're looking at lung deflation in relation to pathology. This one makes a lot of sense, I think. Oh, they're fixed. How's that? Better? So we got lung deflation across pathology path, pathology class. So on the bottom here, the 4 columns there are the lung pathology classes, and then you have your deflation along the rows in the bottom. So again, a pretty clear relationship. This one makes a lot of sense. If there's pathology in the lungs, they're probably not going to be very elastic, and they're going to undergo fibrosis and scarring and repair, and that's going to affect their ability to deflate on the table at harvest. So we also had BRD treatment records to add into the mix, since these animals were in the feedlot. So it made sense, if we're scoring lungs, let's add in the BRD treatment records, see if there's an association. We think about BRD in kind of two different ways. We published a paper on this in 2016, looking at BRD as either a trait where the animals were treated 0 or 1 time, so incidence of treatment. Also, how many times they were treated. So the second trait is, were they treated 0 times, once, twice, 3 times, so on. So our definition of BRD is a feedlot treatment definition. We count that treatment when the animal was pulled by a trained pen rider, treated according to treatment protocol in the feedlot. And that triggers, in our database, an observation of BRD. So in total, we're sitting about 9.74%. Treated for BRD in this set. Here's the treatment buckets, so not treated versus treated, and then the heart score. So there is a little bit of a bias here, but it's not such a strong correlation that jumps off the screen and says there's a cause of heart failure or heart score. But there is some small association. We'll get to the genetic correlations. We did estimate those here in a minute. Here's lung deflation. Again, you have to kind of squint your eyes if you're going to decide that there's a bias there. There is a slight uptick in treated animals for failure to deflate, but it's nothing too significant. And then lung pathology across the BRD treatment classes. So this one, there is some difference there. So we've got 0.9% and 0.4% versus we're up over 2% total for moderate and severes in the treated class for observing lung pathology. So we put together a data set. We wanted to take all these phenotypes, pull together a data set that was genotyped and estimate genetic parameter estimates. So we put together kind of a superset of BRD, about 25,000 animals that had treatment records in the feedlot for BRD, pulled in their heart and lung scores, put together kind of a genetic evaluation model where we use contemporary group as lot, sex, and harvest date. And then we use the Bluff F90 suite, the threshold Gibbs model, estimate genetic parameters. Here's our phenotype definitions for those 5 traits. These are all binary or categorical phenotypes. So there's the two BRD definitions, binary number of treatments. The center, that's our heart score, and then the 2 lung deflation and lung pathology traits in their 4 categorical buckets. Heritability of BRD, those have stayed pretty stable, somewhere between 0.12 and 0.14. That trait's not all that heritable, but we can make progress with that level of heritability. Heart score in this data set, BCHF had a heritability of 0.29. Interestingly, lung deflation came right along with congestive heart failure. Seems like it has a almost on par heritability. Lung pathology, almost 0 heritability for that trait. That kind of makes sense. Lung pathology is kind of maybe a little bit more environmentally determined. So not too heritable. There are the genetic correlations. I've highlighted in red the ones that seem significant to us. Genetic correlation between heart score and lung deflation is over 0.9, suggesting that if we're phenotyping heart score, we're probably also capturing lung deflation at the same time. Those 2 traits seem to be so interrelated, the genetic correlation is very high. So good news, if we have lung deflation, we can add accuracy to our congestive heart failure EPD. Lung deflation and lung pathology, those are also have a genetic correlation that's pretty high. Same story with the BRD traits and lung pathology. It's not that surprising. Seems like those traits make a lot of sense to us. We are a little curious about have we done a good job phenotyping these traits? There seems to be potential for error when you're phenotyping all these together at the same time on the table, that there is some bias in the person scoring to add similar scores, but we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that. The next steps that we're thinking about for our program, we need to make multi-trait genetic evaluations. That's always something we're trying to do. We think we could put together heart score, lung deflation, and BRD, and sort of create a total health model, and use that BRD and congestive heart failure EPD to make selection decisions. We've got economic weights for BRD. It seems pretty straightforward to add those for congestive heart failure. We currently implement threshold selection with congestive heart failure, but it seems pretty straightforward just to go ahead and add this as a trait in the selection index and make progress that way. Another project we're working on, we're working with Dr. Brad White at KSU. We're doing a histopathology project. We've actually sent them tissue samples from both affected lungs and hearts from the same animal to see if we can get a deeper look kind of in the veterinary or biological pathways that are being displayed here. Last couple of slides are just some other things that we've discovered as we've gone down this road. We have a small data set of animals with the PAP phenotype, a genotype, as well. I didn't include those animals, given that's such a small, 1,000 animals is not really enough to make big claims and big statements about what's going on. But in that data set, we do have a genetic correlation between PAP and heart score of about 0.2. The chart we're looking at is that set of animals. On the x-axis is their actual PAP score. On the y-axis is their congestive heart failure EPD. So this kind of suggests to us that if we're selecting animals on a low PAP phenotype, their risk for congestive heart failure could be all over the place. We're going to miss, if we're selecting on low PAP, we're going to miss a whole lot of animals that are high risk for congestive heart failure. And that seems to make sense because PAP is an indicator trait that the cardiopulmonary system is undergoing some type of change. If those animals haven't experienced the elevation or the stress that triggers the PAP score, we're probably going to assume those are low risk. And that would be, we think that's going to miss the majority of the animals. We're not convinced we can solve this with PAP. We think it's going to take multiple traits to characterize the cardiopulmonary system and develop EPDs that capture all of that information. We've taken a look at the 2 marker test that's out there, the one that was developed at US Mark. That 2 marker test is currently not validating in our population. Big picture from this slide, if you look at the bottom left here, that false positive rate. So if we take those markers, classify our animals in our population with those 2 markers, we have a close to 77% false positive rate. If you give a group of cattle in a feedlot to a feedlot and say, manage these cattle differently, but your false positive rate is going to be 77%, they're going to laugh you out of the room. That's not going to be a realistic way to deal with those animals. Risk management today for what we're doing at Simplot, we focus on stress management in the feedlot. This is a seasonal trait. We're right in the middle of scoring in the packing plant during the summer when you get those temperature swings, hot in the afternoon, cool at night. This trait starts to kick up. Randall's done a great job in the feedlot with getting the pen riders to identify these animals early and get them on a truck. That's part of the reason why we see so many 4s and 5s in our study population, is those pen riders are able to tell which animals are under stress and at risk. We get those animals on a truck and they go 50 miles up the road to the packing plant, the next day or same week. In our breeding programs, we're focusing on maximizing crossbreeding. We use a 3-breed cross in our system. Short term, for our maternal programs, we've looked at replacing Angus with Hereford for 1 to 2 years. We've done a lot of screening of Angus bulls, and we're just not finding that many that fit a low risk profile for our program. So we think if we can look to a different breed to short term fix this problem, that's what we're gonna do. We started screening all the bulls we're gonna buy and put back on our ranches for this EPD. We're trying to lower that risk profile. And all the new genetics that go out the door. We're also screening all of our embryo donors and our AI bulls that enter the system. We said we wanted to create a tool for the industry. We currently have this trait as a part of the identity panel with Neogen. So if you order Neogen's identity beef today, you get an EPD for congestive heart failure or breeding rank. And that's the most accurate assessment we can give you for congestive heart failure. That model is up to date, and we're going to be updating that yearly with Neogen multiple times per year. We're also working with other commercial outlets. This will pop up in other places in the future. Right now, it's commercially available with Neogen. We also work directly with producers. So if a producer wants to come talk to us directly, we have other ways of getting you an EPD for heart failure. There's a big team that makes all this happen at Simplot. I have to say thank you to all these people, phenotype collection, veterinarians, all kinds of people. So thanks to those guys. Please reach out to me, reach out to Randall. If you have any questions, we're happy to work with people and discuss new ideas. Appreciate your time.